Okie doke. We're here for the fourth and final session of the. Am I right? Fourth? Feels like a very long time ago that we started, Neil. So we've talked about all sorts of things from sustainability and the city and societies to medicine and governance. And our final one, we've got Eric and Pez here to talk about transportation and what that might look like in the year 2049. So the idea of an Ignite talk is that you've got 20 slides of 15 seconds each, making a total talk of 5 minutes. Is that correct? Well done, yes, thank you for the maths. And we've managed to be strict and trim down our speakers' slides to exactly 20 slides because they tried to sneak some extra slides in, which is not on. We've just had the session on governance and society, and I believe society would break down if we had more than 20 slides in an Ignite talk. So there's going to be 2 presentations and then a Q&A at the end. And our first talk is by Eric about road spectrum and the future of transit.
Thank you very much, Serino. So, assuming we haven't unveiled beaming technology to materialize us from point to point, in 2049, this is what I think is going to happen. We're going to see the road system that we all know become part of what's called a city operating system. Now, in 2049, we won't be driving individual cars that we own or lease. We'll actually be using the road as a service provider of transport. It will take you to where you want to go from where you are. And we have to save our planet. We can't keep putting more cars on there. So this idea comes from the whole concept of electricity pricing. You may be aware that you can get some electricity tariffs which pay you more money when you don't use electricity. We could do the same thing for the roads. You could actually be paid for not using the road. And it looks like a trading system just like electricity does. So we would have finally a comprehensive use of a digital asset called a road spectrum, which we can splice, dice and trade just like on a stock exchange, and stores what we call a crypto asset. Every city will now resemble what an airport does. When you go to an airport, the plane's actually paying to land at the airport, and that's called airspace time pricing. Why don't we do that on land and call that road space time pricing? So if a road was no longer an operating cost for city, but instead a source of revenue, we could actually pay people who are less wealthy and less better off because they haven't got a job without actually being communists. We could actually redistribute by lack of use. And we'd actually be pricing the seats in the same way as you can do on things like Seat Frog or when you buy a train ticket with Virgin Trains. Depending on time of day you go, it's a different price. You would literally be trading your use of the road in the same way. And that happens, as I said, with electricity markets. So when you take a train trip, I'm sure you actually just buy a seat on a train. You don't go back to your garage, take out your train, drive your train onto the track. When you get to your destination, park your train, then come back to it later. That'd be ridiculous, but we do that with cars. Now, we could actually finance a cheaper train system so everybody could use the train more effectively, because right now, even the train buses take planes because the train is so expensive. And there's something clearly wrong with this. So we need a new and equitable way to finance our road system so it doesn't destroy our economy, but we can also make it a way to actually create value for people who use it less than a certain minimum, okay? Most cars, we only use them 1 hour a day, and for most trips, it's 90% of the time, most trips only have 1 passenger in. If instead of using our Raspberry Pis and other devices to do Bitcoin mining, what we do is we do congestion mining. We use the same idea to work out the best way to move the largest number of people in the smallest amount of vehicles, and then you get payment for that. That would change our logistics industry. We'd move more freight, we'd move more people, everything would become cheaper, more equitable, without any government edict, without anybody saying, you've got to do this, or you've got to take money from that person and give it to that person. If you don't use the transport system as much as somebody else, not only will you not pay more, you'll get paid something, because it becomes a negative asset, like a negawatt. Just as you've got megawatts, you've got negawatts. The Guardian did this 4 years ago. It's got even worse since. Because of the downturn in the economy, there's masses of unsold cars, 4 million apparently, just recently. And all these cars are sitting in parking lots around the world, rusting, not being able to be sold because nobody can use them. The way we fix that is if, in the same way, you say to those car makers, sell those cars to a private road operator who then leases them out per minute, per hour to whoever needs them, just like the train does it. And this would result in what's called a Pareto win, where everybody in the transaction is better off from doing the transaction, okay? Pareto is an Italian economist, I think he's Italian, who came up with the idea of 20% of effort gives 80% of results. But Pareto efficiency or optimality is the idea that you can't get a better deal than if everybody shares in a certain way, so they get paid for not using the road, and the people who use the road more can use it more effectively and efficiently. And this is a little XKCD type cartoon. It's not perfect, it's good enough. That's what Pareto means. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfection in economics doesn't really work. You have to go with what actually works for most people most of the time. So, final things to say, individual liberty is my whole idea. I don't want any kind of government saying you have to do this or you have to do that. Let's let the market decide in a way that preserves individual liberty but allows us to use all the infrastructure we have in the most effective way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. And second up, we have Pez talking about... I've forgotten what you're talking about, Pez. You're talking about the path to future transport, which is not what it says on my sheet. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Do you want to do it?
It's turned off. Yep, yeah, that's working. Right. Hi, my name is Pez. I am passionate about electric cars. I drive an electric car. I commute on an electric skateboard. Today I drove in on an electric moped, and I'm here to share with you one vision of the path to transport in 2049. It has quite a good synergy with our previous talk. I'm mainly going to be focusing on journeys into the city centre and how they will change over time. The slide has not moved forwards. It's been 25 seconds. Wow, that's hard to read. Good. I can't start talking about the future of transport without taking a few moments to talk about where we are today. Today, the majority of people own their own car, and they travel to city centres by car. The traffic is increasing the levels of pollution in our cities, causing congestion, and the fine air particle pollution has been shown to cause severe health issues. But things are starting to head in the right direction. It should definitely be moving because it's 35 seconds now. And it's every 15 seconds. Do you want to just click the button? Okay, we've got a human... Grand, thank you very much, man inside the machine. The counter on the top right is not moving either. Don't you love technology? So reliable. I've broken the laptop. There you are. No one should use computers. No one should drive cars. It's all a terrible idea. Oh, is it genuinely crashed? Sorry. That's weird. There's nothing special in that slide. It's just a picture. That'll do. I can see that. Yeah, it's a Mac. Right, here we are, picking up from today. So there are now tax incentives, such as the ultra-low emission zone in London, where if you're driving a diesel car, you're charged £12.50 to be allowed into the city centre. And this is the first example of incentivising travel. So getting people to think about not using their car and using other forms of transport. Light electric vehicles, such as scooters, mopeds, unicycles and skateboards, are also becoming increasingly common in the UK. Unfortunately, they're regulated by a law from the 1850 that makes them illegal to use, and you get a fine of up to 6 points on your licence and £300 for using them. But, skipping ahead to 2025, it's all fine. The UK's caught up with Europe and the US, and we're regulating them. With the legalization and legislation of these electric vehicles, these light electric vehicles, so a personal one like a scooter, we start to see more and more of them on our cities, as exactly is in the US. With the ease of suddenly being able to get an electric scooter or non-car out with your phone, instead of taking their car into town, people take public transport and then a scooter from the train station to where they're trying to get to. Moving forward another 5 years to 2030, electric cars and plug-in hybrids with a decent amount of range, because we're still not quite there yet, have now been on the market for about 10 years. There's a very strong used car market. Currently, it's uncommon to buy a new electric car because they're just so expensive. At the same time, we're starting to see the first examples of level 4 autonomous self-driving cars. Level 4 autonomy means that on predefined roads, the car can drive itself completely hands-free, but it has to have been pre-configured and have gathered enough data about that road. They can't drive anywhere just yet. As a result of the surge in emissions-free vehicles, instead of just taxing diesels to come into the city, diesel cars become entirely banned from town centres, and we start taxing cars that produce pollution. This puts continued pressure and acts as a feedback loop to get people out of their vehicles into electric vehicles and into personal transport. Moving into 2035, just as electric cars have started to become fully mainstream, unfortunately, as a result of self-driving cars, car ownership starts to become less and less common. As you were saying, there is no need to own your own car when you can just hire one with your phone anytime you need it. One example of a company that's already claiming to do this, but it doesn't really work, don't believe them, is Google, who have a fully autonomous ride-sharing system based in the US. The theory is, just like Uber, you can summon a car to your location and have it take you door to door with no humans involved. Once we have a lot of self-driving cars, cities will start to put in self-driving car lanes. Self-driving cars have a much quicker reaction time than humans. They can drive much closer together, and there's a much higher throughput. There's no race when the traffic light changes green. All cars can move immediately. So we start to have fewer and fewer need for roads in our cities. As statistics start to show these self-driving cars are safer than human drivings, cities start to put in rules that say all cars must drive autonomy on self-driving cars in the city centres. Fewer and fewer lanes are needed. As fewer and fewer lanes are needed, we can remove them and replace them with bike lanes and restaurants and green spaces, helping reduce pollution. Effectively banning cars except delivery trucks and automated self-driving taxis from our city centres. With these dedicated pedestrianised bike and light electric vehicle lanes in city centres, fewer and fewer people turn out to actually need cars, which works in a feedback loop, decreasing the need for these roads, and we have less and less roads. I finally caught up with my slides. Right, 2045. Very few people own their own vehicles. Instead, you summon a vehicle with your phone, as I've previously said, and take advantage of self-driving ride-sharing, or hire or own a light electric vehicle to get yourself along the bike paths. With city centres fully pedestrianised, it is now very common to autonomously carpool to the city centre, as this beautiful mock-up shows you, and then use a light electric vehicle for the final part of your journey. People that do own their own transport likely own these electric bikes and electric vehicles, and there are now charging spaces in. Now all cars are self-driving and they have full autonomy in our city centres. We don't need car parks anymore. We can get rid of all the car parks, we can build beautiful green spaces, increase the amount of pedestrian areas, and build new buildings. So, what does your journey to the city centre look like in 2049? If you live nearby as a result of the new housing I've just alluded to, you likely walk the new pedestrianised areas away from roads and away from cars. If you live slightly further afield, you're likely to take public transport and use a light electric vehicle for the last mile of your journey, so bring your scooter on the train with you, or hire one when you get to your destination. Even further out of time, or the weather's just bad, because this is the UK, we can't all be riding scooters like in California, you summon your self-driving electric car and carpool to the town centre. So, to try and draw a conclusion out of that 5 minutes of slightly rushed talking, in the future, where possible, we'll avoid car ownership using ride-sharing and pooling schemes. People that need a car should have plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. Light electric vehicles will become more and more common once they've been legalised, and we need modernised rules and regulations to keep us moving in the right direction, otherwise we'll stagnate. With no encouragement and no tax incentives, there's no need to move forwards. And it should have gone to the next slide. That's 5 minutes, the end. It's just broken again. Apparently computers don't like me. End of slideshow, broken. Okay, I'll sit down.
Turn me on. There we go. Amazing. Thank you very much. That's really cool. I like the vision of the future there. You've ended with a proper tour through the future. It's really cool. One question. I'll start off with a question, but if anybody in the audience has a question or a comment, feel free to put your hand up at some point. As you were talking, one of the things I was wondering is, why do we even need cars at all? And you sort of got there near the end of your presentation, the idea that slowly we might go back to like 100 years ago, people didn't need cars. We weren't traveling, commuting an hour to get into work. Like maybe rather than trying to optimize cars by making them electric or whatever, like maybe we should be trying to reconfigure our cities or something to make it easier for people to do the things, or making things like remote working more likely. I don't know what you two thought about that.
So that's one of the things I was kind of alluding to at the end, but a 5-minute talk isn't a very long time. Our cities are currently designed to encourage use of cars. That's the entire thing. The quickest way to get from anywhere is use a car, and that is wrong. One of the things that decreased car ownership and ride-sharing schemes I would hope would encourage, particularly if there's regulation that comes along with that, is more and more pedestrianisation. Like I was saying, if we remove our car parks, we don't need people living so far out of town. They can be based further in town. You can walk places. The city becomes a more pleasant place to live because it's not full of pollution, so more people want to live. The reason people want to live in the country and drive an hour into town every day is because you get a nice big house with lots of green space. If our city centres look like that, there's no reason not to live in the city centre where everything is already.
And I would add to that in the next sort of 20, 30 years, you're going to see people moving away from any kind of individual owned vehicle, just in the same way as we don't own trains or planes. What we do is we buy a seat, we buy a per-use idea. You can think of the car today as a single-use plastic bag. It's not great, but to be honest with you, to try and replace that even with electric vehicles, the energy return on energy invested to make an electric vehicle still doesn't make sense. What we need is the whole system to become far more efficient. And ironically, once you start giving people choices, they'll choose different places to live. I watched a great YouTube video about why living in the city centre in the US is something which is considered for the poor, whereas in Europe, it's something for the very wealthy. And it's got to do with those American cities were built after the train lines were invented, and people who are wealthy could live further out in these huge estates. But now it's going back the other way, and you're seeing reverse migration and all the people rubbing up against each other with gentrification or anti-gentrification projects. The simple fact of the matter is, if you can get anywhere in the city, because the road system, whether it sends you a scooter, a car, a shared van, gets you where you want to go, that will redefine the cities by the market and by choices. It shouldn't be down to government to say, you must do this and you must do that. That always sounds great, but then you get Stalin's Russia or Venezuela.
Any comments? I think, did you have a question? You want a question?
Just real quick, the optimism about the government placing green things in place of the things that already exist, what are they actually more likely to put in place of car parks and things that are unsightly?
Well, the most likely thing that's going to go in there is things that make the government money. But like I'm suggesting, if we have tax incentives, to say building a park makes you money. We've got the concept of carbon credits at the moment. Say a developer demolishes their car park where they're currently making £5 per vehicle per car and put trees in and make £5 per tree instead. That would... You have to have the market behind you to encourage that kind of activity. We can't have this idealistic, oh, everyone wants to make the world better, it's great. There has to be money behind it and financial markets. So.
And I would say that from a land use perspective, what you find is as soon as there is more money to be made per square meter by building apartments or something else rather than putting a car, it will happen. After the war, when land was cheap, national car parks bought up a lot of the land, and I don't know if they knew there was going to be a rise in car ownership, but that worked out quite well. But in reality, nobody really knew what to do with all that land. In Berlin, which is an enormous city, I don't know if many of you have been there, but it's one of the biggest cities in Europe by area. What they found was easier to do than try and maintain or police areas with derelict buildings is raise them to the ground and put forests there. So Berlin is a very bizarre city where you go there, there's an entire forest in the city, within the city boundaries. Think of Black Woods in Liverpool 25, or Liverpool 16, but basically the size of Liverpool. That's what they've got. So you'll find the market will, it doesn't step in, it just happens. People say, we can make better use of this. We can have an art space or something else that people value.
I just wanted to say what you said earlier, that the car is the fastest mode of transport in the city, is just not true. As far as I know, up to 6 mile distance, the bicycle is the fastest way of traveling. The other thing I wanted to say is the vast majority of car journeys are under 2 miles. That won't change with electric vehicles. I think it's the inertia of people who just get stuck in their ways and don't want change. If you wanted to, you don't have to wait for electric vehicles or electric scooters to arrive in Liverpool. You can walk and cycle now. And a lot of people just don't see that as an opportunity because yeah, okay, there are lots of reasons, barriers, but it is possible and it can be done. You don't really have to wait for a magic sort of different two-wheel vehicle, because we have it already. The bicycle has been around for over 100 years and it's perfect for city transport, not even for goods.
I completely agree, and in fact, I potentially misspoke before. I think I was talking about long-distance journeys, not journeys within the city centre. I think a key problem that's hurting adoption, there are two key problems there. There's the perception of cyclists, and then also the lack of infrastructure supporting them. If you try cycling Liverpool city centre, there are very few bike lanes. They're just on the road. I've tried riding my electric scooter. You just get kicked into the road because the bike lane runs out with no warning. Without that infrastructure there, you're not going to see the majority of people riding a bike, because the truth is, a car currently is more convenient. That's why people buy cars. They're not buying a car because it's longer and more arduous. It feels quicker. When it's raining, it's easier, and it feels safer.
So I think it plays a little bit in the earlier series of talks, Ronnie and Arthur. It is a question of sort of the infrastructure. It's a question of, do we wait for our city council to sort out the infrastructure and then we start cycling, or do we just take the road? Maybe some of you have heard there is a regular event. Next one is on the 7th of July, if I'm not mistaken. It's a Sunday, 300 bikes. The idea is to just build a critical mass. I hear from so many people that they would cycle if they would feel safe on the road. Safety can be safety by numbers. I think waiting for Department of Transport or Liverpool City Council to give us bike lanes and safe cycle infrastructure, we can wait forever. It won't happen. We just have to enforce it. I think there has to be a certain level of civil disobedience. You know, Holland is often mentioned as, you know, amazing cycling country. They did, with civil disobedience, enforce it. In the 70s, people in Holland said, we had enough of our children being killed on the road by cars. And they had die-ins, they just took it into their own hands. They didn't wait for the government to say, oh, let's build some cycle lanes. They won't. We have to do it. And we have to take action. That's mine.
You make a very valid point, and in fact, in Washington, D.C., where a couple of my friends are based, they have a movement where people buy plungers and stick plungers on the road, and then effectively you then have a separate cycle lane. And this has actually been very effective, because as soon as the council come and remove them, everyone replaces them, and they now have, effectively, there's this guerrilla movement that's forced the council to put in official bike lanes and official posts, because every day there are a group of people sneaking in and putting secret bike lanes out there. So you're right, it's not entirely about, you know, requesting the government make this change. I do agree there does have to be a movement from the people to encourage that change to happen, because what's the incentive for the council? They don't care, there's no money in it.
Well, actually, there is money in it. All they need to do is do what they do in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, car tax doesn't cost you 300 or 500 a year. It costs you £3,000 a year. So you would cycle when you're spending that much on your road tax, okay? And they've got great roads, because that's a revenue earner which they can plow back into the roads. All we need to do is treat driving on the road the same as we treat parking. You don't expect to park for free. When there's free parking, it's abused. When there's a free buffet lunch, people turn up and take more than they need. That's what we have with driving. If we charge our road space correctly, you'll find there'd be far fewer cars on there. You'd find there'd be the money to put those cycle lanes in, and the market will step in and actually give people the pointers. All we need to do is make people pay the true price in terms of congestion, pollution, and other dangers for driving.
Right. My question is not really so much about passenger transport, because so many discussions about transport turn out to be about passenger transport. But to me, the most significant thing about transport is transporting freight. Shipping, international shipping in particular, road and rail, not really air freight, not very important. How do your comments, and they are interesting, how do you see the future in 2049 for freight? Because obviously most roads, you get all these terrible cars off them, you've still going to have, presumably, still going to have to find some means of delivering all the items that are going to be retailed and manufactured and so forth.
I think freight, it's an unnecessary evil, and it's a necessary evil, and it's never going to go away. You can discourage use of freight driving through the city centres like we have with the port by imposing tariffs on the people driving those vehicles. Then companies may think up more inventive and more efficient ways of getting the materials they need to the places they need to be. But you make a very good point. Freight will never go away. I think even in my utopian idea where there are no roads anywhere, there are still roads. If you look at one of the mock-ups, there's a single road out the back, out the way, not where the people are, but it's a necessity for getting goods around, particularly if you start to think about less able people who can't walk or drive their fantastic scooter. You do still need that infrastructure there.
And I've been working with a couple of startups which have something called curb space-time pricing, where you pay, just like when a ship comes into berth, it has to pay for access. If you do that with curb, which is a subset of road space-time pricing, you find that people will start to group up their deliveries. A University of Southampton study found that a lot of the Amazon deliveries that you get are actually within something like 1 mile, and this is a van driving round. If it just stopped, put all its stuff in a central location, and you had men with actual wheelie scooter things, or those, those trolley things, you'd actually take about, something like 60 or 80% of all those vehicle trips off immediately. The other thing we can do for long-haul freight is what's called row-row, or roll-on, roll-off trains. Trucks, just like the Eurotunnel, would get on these trains, and they'd be transported most of the distance through the core of the country. Now, ironically, unfortunately, because it was Hitler, people think, I don't want to think about that, but they had an idea to have these ultra-wide freight trains, which would have gone, just like with the Autobahn, and that would have taken you the majority of freight. We can still do that. That would take a massive amount of CO2 emissions off our roads, and more importantly, it's the last mile which is important, but that can be done with a reduction in vehicle trips by using empty space in vehicles going back the other way, and also grouping things up and delivering them by hand where appropriate.
Yeah, it's reminded me, there was a podcast I was listening to where they were talking about, I can't remember which country it was like Thailand or Taiwan or somewhere, where they do waste very differently. So basically everybody's responsible for the waste they produce, and you don't get bins in public spaces. You have to take your rubbish back home with you, and it's bin day, and it's like the ice cream van comes, and basically the garbage truck, rather than pulling up at everybody's house, parking up, the guy has to get out, and these poor binmen are having to empty everybody's bins. It's like the only way you can get rid of your rubbish is by taking it to the garbage truck yourself and filtering it and sorting it yourself, like as the truck is driving down the street. So there could be interesting ways that you could reconfigure people's working practices and living practices to make much better use of the roads without having to make the Amazon van park up at every house. Like it could be you're expecting a delivery, go out and
as I said,
fetch it.
I saw research when they actually they mapped the trips, and they said so many of these trips could be done by somebody walking rather than driving a van to each of those places if you just worked out in advance. Also, what you just described was a market principle called internalization of costs. When you have a public body taking away things, no matter how much of them you use, you get litter. What's interesting is in the United States, some cities have done away with public bins. and told people you'll get massive fines if you litter. So people are taking their litter home with them and disposing of it that way, and there isn't as much litter. This is counterintuitive, but this is what they found. And when we were growing up, well, some of us anyway, because I'm quite old, mothers would always say the kids always leave things in their pockets. So if you don't empty the pockets, you get like a shredding of tissues, whatever, in the washing machine. These days, they leave it all on the street. So what's interesting is that internalization of costs when you are responsible. And okay, this is a libertarian in me talking, but it's been shown to work over and over again. I'm not sure why West Kirby and some other areas. I was in High Wycombe and Beaconsfield yesterday or 2 days ago. Spotless. I mean, you literally only go 2 or 3 miles outside Liverpool city centre. The Wirral generally is spotless. Okay, some bits aren't, but I'm not quite sure what that is. That is something to do with internalization of costs.
Any other questions or comments from anyone else?
Ladies and gentlemen, the library will be closing.
Do you have a
in 20
question?
minutes. I repeat, closing in 20 minutes.
There you go. 20-minute call. Anything else from our speakers, or should we wrap it up?
I have nothing else.
You have nothing else? Thank you very much to both of our speakers. A round of applause. And thank you to the audience as well. You've got 20 minutes to go enjoy the rest of Makefest. Have fun. And the next Ignite Liverpool is at Leaf on Bold Street on the 19th of August. So you can still sign up if you want to give a 5-minute talk. If not, come along and watch everybody else. Thank you.